Air Mobility Caucus, dealing with Travis and dealing with the mobility that the Air Force has to get its job done. Bipartisan in nature, working on a common goal to make sure that our military has the mobility necessary to deal with whatever comes up, and to make sure that Travis continues to be a key airport and Air Force base here in this nation. Agricultural flood issues. Neighbor came to me in Walnut Grove down in the Delta and said, "Did you know that you're not going to be able to build your barn out back?" I said, "No, what's happened?" "Got a problem. The levees have been downgraded, can't get flood insurance." So up and down this new district, this problem exists. Working with Democrats and Republicans, local as well as the federal level, we introduced a major piece of legislation that will be nationwide in scope, providing an agricultural flood system, one that will deal with the agricultural interests in the flood zones so that they can continue to build this facilities that are necessary and avoid urbanization of those areas. I think we're all concerned about our civil liberties. That's an issue too. Working across the aisle with a very conservative fellow out of Louisiana, we're going to put into the National Defense Authorization Act a piece of legislation called the due process, eliminating the ability of the government, the military, and others to hold people indefinitely without going to a court. That's bipartisanship.
Question number 2. The order will be Vann, Ray, Garamendi, Tubbs. This month, the Heritage Foundation published a study indicating that unnecessary federal regulations are costing consumers, businesses, and the economy approximately $46 billion each year, which the U.S. Chamber of Commerce believes is hampering job growth. Do you believe the U.S. economy is overregulated? And if so, what would you do to reduce or eliminate unnecessary federal regulations? Ms. Vann?
Probably my favorite question out of the whole bunch. I said earlier to a group of people, I was doing regulatory reform before regulatory reform was deemed cool as a national issue. I absolutely believe this country is overregulated. In the last three and a half years alone, 10,000 plus new rules. 10,000 is what makes up that $46 billion number. 106 of those were considered major impacts on businesses in the United States, and 11 regulatory policies that were considered major were repealed. So we have 106 new ones and 11 old ones were repealed. That's not true regulatory reform. That's not repealing these regulations that keep our businesses from growing and moving this country forward. That's replacing ones that 106 for 11, that number just kind of is so stark. We have to start looking at what these regulatory policies are doing to our businesses. Let's just take one out of the EPA, for example. Removing the word navigable out of the Clean Water Act. And I grant you this is getting down in the weeds a little bit. But any business that's in this district that is resource-based is going to be dramatically affected by this word removed out of the Clean Water Act. This is going to allow regional interpretation of this environmental law and interpretation by mid-level bureaucrats on your businesses that need these federal permits to go forward. There's not going to be a level playing field. The regulations will be interpreted different for California than they will for states back east. And this, again, puts an additional burden on your businesses and my business to grow. We cannot operate in this environment any longer. You know, we have to start with removing major barriers. We have a macro level issue and a micro level issue. We have to start with removing regulatory policies and removing the funding and the mandates that go with them. Then we have to look at it from a micro perspective and start looking at the mid-level bureaucrats that are overreaching in their regulatory policy and trying to extract more from our businesses. We have to address it on both levels, and it's going to take a long time. It took us a long time to get to this point, and it's going to take us a long time to repeal some of these and get back to it. But if we aren't able to do it, businesses aren't going to continue to be able to grow. You look at some of the new restrictions coming out of the Labor Department, and again, out of EPA, and you have to find a happy medium and a balance. We have the greatest country in the world, and we can't go backwards by restricting ourselves from being able to grow.
Mr. Ray.
example. In 1970, on the cover of Time magazine, it said that man-made emissions were causing the next ice age. In the 1990s, they said that man-made emissions were causing the world to global warming, and the world was going to burn up. Either one happened. In 0203, it leveled off again. It's 90, 99, in 0203, we started to cool again. We are still operating with an 8032 in California to combat global warming and cap and trade, when in fact man has no control over global warming at all. Charles Lindzen of MIT has said that over 99%, and this guy is considered perhaps the foremost authority on the climate in the United States, maybe the world, 99% plus of all that takes place with weather and climate has to do with the different phases of the sun. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing. And yet, we still have people, in the EPA running around with this cap and trade. It just, the IRS, there are 75,000 pages in the IRS, in the regulations. How on earth can it take 75,000 pages? It's just like when they did the same kind of thing when they did healthcare, and it had 27,000 pages, whatever the heck it was, and somebody said, why could it possibly take that many pages to write something? I said, only two things take that many pages to write. One, something that you don't understand, or two, something you don't want the people reading to understand. There is way too much regulation, and in some cases, it's regulated stuff that they don't even have control of. Yeah, we're going to need to clean it right. It's going to take some time. It's not something that's just going to end overnight. But we have to go in there with that mentality to start taking those unnecessary regulations apart, and all these different regulations, and for example, IRS regulations, EPA regulations, all the different ones that politicians have used to make areas for certain companies open and to make it more difficult than the competition. I think we have somebody in the, I forget which department it is, but this guy from GE, the CEO from GE is one of these czars or something, which is interesting. He's like a job czar or something. He said in the last 10 years he's outsourced 1 million jobs overseas. Since 2007 he hasn't paid any taxes, but they paid $84 million to lobbyists. Does any of that make sense? The base thing is we have to go back to the mentality and straighten this thing out and get things back on track, start making some sense here. And the American people see it and understand it, and they are screaming for somebody to tell them the truth and to step up and do something not based on a party, who's going to make who look good, or I'm going to vote for this because he said it, but something to step up and start taking stuff apart a piece at a time so it makes sense. People on either side will agree when you sit down and show them a solution that makes sense.
Congressman.
The question started with a very, very interesting word, unnecessary. We ought to define that before we go any further talking about regulations. What are the unnecessary regulations and what are the necessary regulations? Let's talk about those a little bit. Shall we talk about clean air? Is it good to have asthma among all of our children? Or is it important to regulate emissions and air quality? You like a little bit of arsenic and mercury for your kids? EPA is regulating the air quality of the coal-fired power plants, and a lot of the rhetoric you hear comes from coal-fired power plants that say that's unnecessary. Maybe for them, but it is necessary for the children. They want to talk about Wall Street and the collapse of the financial institutions. Clearly a case of deregulation, where the government did not regulate, did not hold accountable, and did not enforce the existing regulations, let alone write decent regulations to protect all of us, homeowners as well as lenders. Regulation, necessary, unnecessary? How about deep water drilling? Remember what happened in the coast, in the Gulf Coast, where there was very little regulation and very little oversight. And now new regulations are in place dealing with how drilling is going to take place in the ocean, off in the ocean. Is it necessary or unnecessary? It just turns out that had we used the regulations that Norway had, that accident probably would never have occurred. The toughest regulations in the world that the oil industry finds they can use off the coast of Norway. We have yet to write those kinds of regulations to protect millions of people and hundreds of billions of dollars of resources. We talk about health care, the Patient's Bill of Rights, stopping insurance companies from discriminating against everybody in this room, whether you're old, whether you have a pre-existing condition, whether you're a woman or a man or your age. Those are regulations that protect us. So when we talk about regulations, we ought to be very careful when we use the word unnecessary. It's easily thrown around, but then when it affects your personal health, when it affects your children's well-being, and the area in which they breathe or have to breathe, we ought to be really careful. And we ought to use regulations that are wise. You may want to note that in the last 4 years, 3.5 years, the Obama administration has issued fewer regulations than the previous administration, and has repealed and modified many more than we've done in the previous 8 years. So regulations are constantly subject to change as circumstances change, as the economy and as the population changes. And that's not a bad thing. But be careful when you say just toss unnecessary around, because many regulations are necessary for your health as well as your children's.
Mr. Tubbs.
Very good. When President Obama took over office, he pointed back to President Bush for the economy and how terrible it was and how it was going south. I remember back not too far when President Reagan took over for a much worse economy with double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates. Heck, we just have bad unemployment, which is terrible, but 1 out of 3. One of the things that Ronald Reagan did was lower taxes, yes, but he lowered regulations. Regulations, the job killer. We've forgotten that. This last 3 years, we have not addressed the regulation issue like Ronald Reagan did under the Grace Commission back in the early 80s. And it was less than 3 years that horrible economy turned around. And we were producing the largest expansion since World War II in our economy. And here we are still stuck with the unemployment we have. When you talk about unnecessary regulation, clean air, sure, we want clean air, but how do we get there? We are spending billions and billions on wind and solar. We've got proven technology today between natural gas and nuclear power that regulations are standing in the way from. You know, we have 104 nuclear power plants cooking in America right now for the last 30 years plus, just fine. Old technology, where countries like France, over 70% nuclear. Holland, over 80% nuclear. Our regulations are standing in the way of clean air and nuclear power. Let's fix that. Talk about jobs and regulations. I like Newt Gingrich's idea. You know, get rid of the EPA and replace it with the Environmental Solutions Agency. What does that look like? The American Disabilities Act. I think it's a great regulation that helps our disabled Americans participate in normal society much better. I think it's a great regulation. The problem is, it's got this personal injury lawsuit capability inside of it, where you have lawyers and people going around to businesses giving or filing unnecessary, frivolous lawsuits and getting away with it because it's cheaper for smart business people who know the risks to just settle, write a check and let them go. But when I talked to a restaurant owner in Martinez who wanted to open up a second restaurant and hire 30 more people, he was hit with one of those ADA lawsuits, and he didn't open up that restaurant, and there's 30 jobs gone. Talking to a Chevron engineer who says, the EPA regulates me with how many or how much heavy metals I can have in my wastewater that goes to open water sources. Great, I love that regulation. I don't want mercury and lead in our water. But he says the EPA tells me how to take the metal out, and it's more expensive and inefficient. Just tell me the limit and let me do it. That's how government needs to work with the job creators. When you talk about unnecessary kills jobs without providing extra. Fix the regulations in a job-friendly way that protects our environment.
So for question number 3, the order will be Ray, Garamendi, Tubbs, Vann. In 2009, Congress enacted the America's Affordable Health Choices Act, which mandates the purchase of private health care insurance by individuals and certain businesses. What is your position on this particular requirement, and how do you believe it will affect small businesses? Mr. Ray.
I don't think there's any question. We're already seeing, it's not even fully implemented, we're already seeing on businesses where they're unable to expand because of the additional cost, or they're just closing up and going to work for somebody else. The problem with, one of the bigger problems that I see with Obamacare basically, is that it will lead to the same type of medical care that, for example, they have in England. If you read the article recently, there was a guy that brought his wife over to America to have surgery. Because in England, where they have socialized medicine, she went, which was basically the same thing. She went to the doctor and they told her that she had a particular type of cancer that would kill her within a year if she didn't have surgery. The earliest surgical date that she could get was 18 months away. That doesn't make any sense. There's no question that the healthcare industry has gotten too expensive. There's other things that need to be done though. The ability to buy insurance from other states. The ability to tort reform, for example. Tort reform. Some of these lawsuits are crazy. I mean, they get a class action suit and, they sue for millions of people. The attorneys get $30 or $40 million and everybody, that was in the action got $150. It doesn't make sense. So the idea is, do we need to reduce the cost for healthcare? Yes. Is Obamacare the way to do that? No. Is there a way to do it that makes sense? Yes, there is. It's just a matter of using some logic and getting it done. Thank you.
Congressman.
One of the great debates of the last 100 years. How does America provide health care? How do we pay for it? It's not a new debate. This has been going on for a century. About 50 years ago, actually 50 years ago, America decided that they could create a program of health insurance that would cover universally all Americans over 65. It's called Medicare, and it really does work. In the Affordable Health Care Act, there's a major portion of it that deals specifically with Medicare. It took $500 billion out of the pockets of the insurance company, an unnecessary bonus that they had been receiving for the previous 9 years, and transferred that money into benefits for seniors, specifically providing programs such as wellness, free visits to determine health status. Some 31 million seniors now have access to that. And because of the Patients' Bill of Rights in that legislation, discrimination in health insurance no longer exists in America. It's illegal for an insurance company to discriminate against an American based upon their age, their health status, pre-existing condition, their sex. Those things are passed now in America. This is all part of the Affordable Health Care Act. And indeed, a portion of it, which was demanded by the insurance company, is the mandate to buy insurance or to pay a penny. That's now being debated by the U.S. Supreme Court, and we'll see which way it goes. But the rest of the pieces of legislation are extremely important. For hospitals in this area, this legislation would significantly reduce those portion of the uncompensated care. These are people that show up at the hospital emergency room and have no money for which to pay. That cost is then transferred to everybody else, either taxpayers or onto your private insurance policy. That's partly dealt with, or largely dealt with in this piece of legislation. It's much needed, and it's much maligned. The cost curve is changed as a result of this legislation. True costs are going up in medical care across the board, and Medicare, along with everyone else, is on the same rising tide. We need to deal with that. In the legislation is a major piece of cost containment called electronic medical records. All of us, if you're in Kaiser, you know what this is all about. There's money out there for clinics so that people don't have to go to the emergency rooms. Clinics are growing. Clinics are in place in this county and providing services to those who are underinsured or not insured at all. In 2014, there'll be an exchange which will provide an opportunity for all of us to shop for the very best insurance policy that fits our particular needs. So what's wrong with all of that? Nothing can be said that is perfect about any piece of legislation. But this takes a major step. Some 40 million Americans will now have insurance as a result of this legislation, and the cost curve is being bent.
Mr. Tubbs.
You said a question one more time.
In 2009, Congress enacted the America's Affordable Health Choices Act, which mandates the purchase of private health care insurance by individuals and certain businesses. What is your position on this particular requirement, and how do you believe it will affect small businesses?
Yeah, the question about the mandate. Okay. It would be great if we could all have health care on somebody else's dime. It would be great if we could afford everything and not have to say no. But it gets back to what I said in my opening statement about priorities and requirements and how much money you have and stretching dollars for every inch they'll go. And then drawing a line and saying, it's not good for the long-term future to spend this way. And it gets back to what I mentioned about the Constitution. You know, we'll see what the Supreme Court says in June. But the question Judge Stevens said about, is it constitutional to create commerce? To then go ahead and regulate it. The Constitution, that common founding document, is that's the main question of this. Now you take a look at its effects on small business. And the last I looked, last summer, there was over 1,500 different entities, unions, some of them, small businesses, McDonald's, already getting exemptions from the Obamacare bill because they know it's not going to work. They can't afford it. Another issue with this bill, when you talk about how it affects small businesses and jobs, in 1967 it was estimated that Medicare, and it's a good program, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I want to save Medicare, I want to afford Medicare, I want it to be there for seniors. I don't want them to lose their services. I'm just pointing out a fact. In 1967, Medicare was predicted to cost $12 billion in 1990. It cost $110 billion. Originally, Obamacare was supposed to cost $940 billion. Well, it's just 1 year later, folks, 1 year later, and the latest Congressional Budget Office estimate is $1.76 trillion. What's it going to be 30 years from now? You can't afford the way it's done right now. We have the best medical system in the world. It's about access, it's about quality. You can tell story after story of people who come to America to get their medical care. There are things in Obamacare that are good, pre-existing conditions. My 18-year-old daughter is on my health care up until 26. I think it's a great idea. Not dropping somebody when they're sick. Excellent idea, but those cost money. And we have to do things that are smart. Government takeover of the healthcare system is not the way to go forward. Talking about unions again. The mandate, and if a company decides to drop your health care, then they just pay a small fine. It's cheaper. Well, there's a reason there's unions, because I know my company that I work for would drop me in a heartbeat just to save that extra dollar and put me on the government healthcare system. I don't want that. I don't want to see that going forward. There's smart reform we can do for our healthcare system. We need to do it right. Thank you.
Ms. Vann.
A mandate to purchase something isn't the solution to our healthcare woes in this country. We have access to some of the greatest medical providers in the world. Enforcing this mandate is going to change the way we utilize this wonderful healthcare system that we have. As it stands currently, 4 million people in this country will be penalized for not having health care or the type of health care that the government now tells them that they have to have. I don't know about you, but my America isn't the America that tells me I have to buy something. And what does this do to small businesses? Small businesses will reduce their numbers of employees. They will reduce the hours that the employees work to fall into a loophole. And make no mistake about it, the cost of this will be borne by you and I. It won't be absorbed. You and I, and the people providing the services, the healthcare providers, will have to pick up the cost of this. Now, once this mandate is removed, Obamacare has the potential for bankrupting the system. We cannot allow for that to happen. We have to repeal this mandate and Obamacare and start looking at other solutions. Obamacare raided Medicare. It took $500 billion out of the current Medicare system without addressing how we backfill that today. We have a gap that's going to hit us on the Medicare side that's going to be insurmountable at some point. We have to make sure that Medicare is there for our seniors that are currently using it and our seniors who are going to be using it shortly. We cannot let Obamacare continue to pull down like they did from the Medicare as it stands now. And back to the exemptions. If Obamacare was such a wonderful piece of legislation, why did Congress exempt themselves? We really need to think about that. Why did specific businesses ask to be exempted? This isn't going to work. We need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a healthcare system that holds me accountable for my own health, that holds me accountable for how I take care of myself, but still protects our citizens that need that protection. There is a way to get there, but what we have today isn't that path.
Okay, question number 4, the order will be Garamendi, Tubbs, Vann, Ray. By 2030, the number of Medicare enrollees is expected to increase from 47 million to approximately 80 million people. And by 2037, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be completely exhausted. What kinds of reforms do you believe are necessary to ensure that the United States is able to fulfill these unfunded mandates without defaulting on its debt? Congressman?
The question is actually incorrect. The Medicare system is not going to go bankrupt. The Medicare system, like most other parts of the American economy, is going to face a major change as the new baby boomers retire and become Medicare recipients. However, if you look at this, there are going to be many, many ways in which Medicare will continue. There will be changes in Medicare, not on the benefit side, but rather on the way in which it operates. For example, using prepaid health plans is one way to control costs, allowing the American government to negotiate drug prices can save tens of billions of dollars a year. Right now, that's not allowed because of the power of the pharmaceutical industry. There are many other ways in which Medicare will be changed over time. But I will tell you this, the Republican budget that passed Congress just 2 weeks ago will destroy Medicare. There's absolutely no doubt Medicare will not survive given that budget. The proposal in it would require that all people that are less than 55 years of age will not receive Medicare. They'll get a voucher and be forced to go out to the private health insurance companies and do the very best they can. If the rest of the policies, that is the repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act takes place, then you are repealing the Patient's Bill of Rights and the proscription on insurance companies for discriminating. So what are we going to do here? We're not going to end Medicare. If there's anything I'm going to fight for, it is the continuation of Medicare as we know it today. A program that will change over time. Benefits will be there for us, all of us, whatever age we have. But if you go with the Republican budget, as proposed, Medicare cannot survive because of the way in which people will opt out of the system. And the cost to the individual will double over the next 10 years. The overall inflation in healthcare will not be dealt with at all by that system. And it will actually increase, or quite possibly increase, the cost of healthcare. Buying insurance across the state lines is a non-starter. I was the insurance commissioner, and I cannot even begin to count the number of scams and schemes that out-of-state insurance companies tried to bring to the citizens of the state of California. Health insurance policies that look good that provided nothing, except the opportunity to pay premiums. Be careful what you're asking for. Now, the system can work. The Affordable Health Care Act is in place. It will need to be changed over time. Social Security is not going bankrupt. Changes in Social Security have happened about once every 20 years since it was incepted in the 1930s. Changes will occur in the future. One thing that could change is simply changing the way in which that system is paid for.
Mr. Tubbs, and I'm reminded that speak into a microphone, please.
Okay, this is part of that broader picture, because entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare are part of the overall budget. The key is to be able to afford it going forward, all of them. You know, you talk about those two, you gotta throw in national defense and those big budget items. How are we gonna afford our national defense? Because it all intertwines and matters. When we go forward, we have to look at the entire budget together and figure out how to make it work so it's balanced. Now, the status quo is not gonna work. The status quo is unsustainable. Whether you want to call it bankrupt or loss of services, whatever you want to say, changes need to be made in Medicare and Social Security, as well as other areas in our budget, every other area in our budget. The idea is how do you make those changes to make sure those services that Americans have come to rely on are still there, and we can afford them into the future. So when you look at some of the sacrifices that must be made, and I did say the word sacrifice, it's got to be everywhere, and Social Security and Medicare are part of national defense and discretionary spending and all the other things that we talk about. So let's put it in that context first. When I look at a balanced budget, I see all Americans relying on the federal government less than they do today. We talk about the World War II generation as being the last great generation that sacrificed to win that war to make sure that the American dream was alive and well for us. We've been living off of their efforts. My generation for sure, my mom and dad, my kids still. But it's our turn, folks. It's our turn now to be that next great generation. And it's got to be that national movement of what are you going to give up to make sure that dream is there for them. That's the context I want to look at Social Security and Medicare and every other part of the budget going forward. Now, looking at that, yeah, there's got to be some changes. Let's start in Medicare with the $100 billion. And I use that round number. I've researched that a lot. There's 60, 80, 100, $200 billion in Medicare that's just lost to fraud and waste and abuse. That's about 20 to 25% of the budget right there. You want to save Medicare? Let's go out, put some money in that fraud department for Medicare that gets about 1 billion claims every year. And let's go save that money that's being wasted. Remember how I started about it's your money? Congress needs to spend your money wisely. Well, there's a lot of your money just being wasted because we're not going after the fraud in Medicare. Let's start there. Instead of revamping the whole thing, let's try saving that money first. Social Security, you bet. I'm 44 years old. I'm not old, whether my kids agree or not. But I know I'm in a lot better shape than my folks were, and a whole lot better shape than my grandparents were. I don't think I need to retire at 65. I don't think I need to start drawing on the government and drawing off of my children's wages at 65. That's another solution I'd throw out there, is raising the age for Social Security. Just a few. Thank you.
Ms. Vann.
Entitlement programs have to be addressed. Medicare cannot be taken away from the seniors. We need to keep the promises that we made to the people who are using it and to our most vulnerable population. But we can start looking at a tiered approach to address it. It doesn't have to be addressed in one fell swoop, but it can be looked at in tiers, kind of like some of the PERS issues are being addressed. It can be a multi-tier level approach to getting it back to a stable setting. It's pure numbers. We have less people in the workforce by generations than we do in the retirement system. When population growth occur in blocks of 10 years, we have more people in the workforce. You can look at the number of people that we have aging out. You can look at how much longer we're living. You can look at the cost of health care in this country. And again, there's going to be additional cost to that health care. And the numbers of people in the workforce that is paying for this system, it's not going to work. We can't keep putting this off. We can't put, the longer we put this off and the longer we don't address this, the worse the situation's going to be. But we don't have to address it in a matter that just wipes Medicare out. The only piece of legislation that has been passed in this country that has taken money out of Medicare has been Obamacare. The Republican budget does not take $500 billion out of it. And there is absolutely a way to address saving the entitlements programs for our future generations and for the people who are using it. But there has to be some accountability. There has to be some competition private sector to bring prices down, and we have to start addressing it now. We can't keep putting it off for years to come because it's only going to get worse.
Mr. Ray, and please speak into a microphone.
The studies and the information I've read, I think from the Government Accounting Office, is that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid will go bankrupt somewhere between 2021 and 2025. There's no question that something has to be done. On the one side, you have politicians, and I haven't read the Republican bill, so I don't know if I haven't had time for that with all the stuff that we're doing. But I know that you have to try to do something. On the one hand, you have people that are trying to do something to make sure that the seniors of today have coverage, and that the seniors of tomorrow and after will have coverage. And on the other hand, you've got people saying, well, that won't work, and they're doing nothing. There is no other offer. There's no other side that comes in from it. That doesn't make any sense. They're driving the Titanic. They can see the iceberg. They know it's coming, but they're not saying anything because they're afraid that the passengers will make the captain and crew, they'll unelect them. If you know for a fact, and we do, that we're going to go, that these systems are going to go bankrupt, we have to make some adjustments. We have to make adjustments to entitlements as a whole, or else we're going to end up just like the countries in Europe where they've got Greece and Spain and Italy. And within the next 5 years now, France is going to be going. Because their entitlements have gotten so high that the size of government is so much larger than the number of taxpayers that they either tax them to death, and at some point, the whole system collapses and crushes them. It's not a matter of if we need to make some changes in these programs. We absolutely have to. The key is sitting down with people from both sides, like John said, and I think it was mentioned. We have to sit down with people from both sides and say, look, we have a problem. We're sailing toward the iceberg. What do you say we change direction here for a while? See if we can't come up with some better ideas. And you can't tell me, with the quality of intelligence of the people back there, and the level of intelligence and logic of the American people, that you can't put together a program that people can live with.
Okay, this will be our last question, and the order will be Tubbs, Vann, Ray, Garamendi. Do you support the tax cut provisions contained within the American Jobs Act recently approved by the House? And is there anything you would have done differently? Mr. Tubbs.
Taxes. Did I mention taxes tonight? We're not going to tax our ways to our balanced budget. You got to look at taxes in the context of what are the penalties. I mean, we have to have some taxes. I went over that, right? We have to pay for good government. But what kind of level of taxes? My solutions come from common sense. Do they work? Conservative. I believe in smaller government versus bigger government. I believe the solutions lie more in the American citizen, the American entrepreneur, the American worker, than they do in the federal government. And I believe in the Constitution. Now, there was no tax rates in the Constitution. No tax rates there. So that one's up for debate. I'm happy with the current income taxes. I mean, I have a great graph in here that shows that the top 1% of wage earners earn about 19% of the income and pay 36% of the taxes. That's all right. But you get down to the bottom 50% of Americans, and they earn about 16% of the income, and they only pay 3%. And then there's graphs in between. I hear the other side always talking about, we got to raise taxes on the rich. We got to raise taxes on the rich. Pay their fair share. When I look at that graph and I see that fair share, it looks pretty fair to me. And oh, by the way, us Americans are trying to get up there. They're paying a lot of money up there. And oh, by the way, the ones paying those high taxes are the ones growing their businesses and creating jobs. And when you look at higher taxes as a way to solve our budget problems, it's really showing that we are failing in government and looking to the American producer to bail us out. Getting back again to this theme that I have tonight. We need to be responsible in government. The tax rates are where they're at. I like where they're at. I don't want to raise them on income. I want to see corporate income tax 35%, now the highest in the world because Japan finally figured it out and lowered theirs. I want to see that come down. I want to see us run responsible government. I'm into numbers. I'm into real solutions. I think we should be able to run our government on about 17% of the gross national product. That should be our target. And I'm gonna add 3% in there to pay off federal debt so that our kids don't have to. If we're taxing our economy, and more than that, taxes are too high. Less than that, I think that's about the right issue, or the right place. So no, I don't want to see the Bush tax cuts expire in 2013. I don't want to see increasing taxes on the rich, because I think it's going to cost jobs for those of us who want to work for a living. So, in a nutshell, taxes are not the solution to our budget problems. Good government, responsible government is. Thank you.
Ms. Vann,
Can you restate the question one more time?
do you support the tax cut provisions contained within the American Jobs Act recently approved by the House? And is there anything you would have done differently?
The Jobs Act is a great first step. It was introduced in the House, I think, approximately about March 8th. It's a great first step in removing some regulatory barriers for small business, allowing businesses to have new avenues to go out and advertise for investors. It strengthens local and community banks. It's definitely the first good bipartisan step in the right direction. And it mostly focuses on small businesses. Now we need to continue with those steps. That's a big step. We need to keep going. This needs to apply to medium businesses and to large businesses. We need to make it go further. Like I said, it was a great step in the right direction. It was a bipartisan step in the right direction, but it only scratches the surface. It removes a few regulatory barriers so that capital can be injected back into the system so that small businesses can grow. But we need to take it even further. Once we get some of our out of control and unnecessary regulatory policies out of our businesses' way, and we set a good, clear playing field as far as our tax regulations go, our businesses know where they can start from. They know how they can grow, and they know what they need to do to get things done. We have to get ourselves and other levels of government out of the way so that our businesses can do that. So it was a good first step, but it needs to go further.
Mr. Ray.
I apologize, I haven't read the bill, so I don't know exactly what the tax cuts were. I know the tax cuts in themselves are a good idea. For example, if I say to you, I'm going to tax you 20% more this year, will that help you become more successful? No. You can't tax your way to success. You have to reduce the amount of taxes now. The way to reduce taxes is to reduce the size of government so you have less the amount of tax dollars. In 1977, Jimmy Carter started the Energy Department so that we could get off, his goal was to get us less dependent on foreign oil. At that time, we had 30-34% of our oil from foreign sources. 35 years later, we have about 18,000, in the Department of Energy, 18,000 federal employees, 100,000 contracted employees. They spend billions and billions of dollars a year, and we get approximately 70% of our oil from foreign sources. There are places that we can definitely cut without the threats that they make every time of, well, old people are going to cut their money, the military are going to cut their money. Two places they never cut. One is government jobs, which the government's too big, we need to cut those back. And the second is they never cut their salary. When it comes back to taking that debt ceiling, we make that big run at the end to save everybody, which was exciting because they only knew 6 months ahead of time that it was coming. You don't tax your way to success. You reduce the amount of outflow that you have, reduce the size of government, reduce the taxes, turn the American people loose. You don't need any stimulus money. You can create over 3 million jobs in the first 24 months by opening up the energy industry with as John said, with some good coverage and good to make sure the emissions are all shot. It can be done right. You can't tell me. Other country, we haven't gotten a permit to build a nuclear power plant in the last 5 years. China has 14, they're building 25 more, and they've got permits for a bunch of them. I just not permits, but they're in the planning stages for a bunch of them. They're smarter than we are. They can do a better job. Obama says, well, we have to drill for oil. That's terrible. Drill, drill, drill. That's all they say. Well, and he says gas is the fuel of the past. Really? What do you put in his limousine today? What's he going to put in his limousine tomorrow when he wants to go? Renewables are the way of the future, but they're not ready for prime time. And these foreign countries that we're buying oil from, that don't even like us, that we're giving hundreds of billions of dollars to, Where did they get the oil? I think they drilled a hole. You tell me that their contractors, their architects, and their engineers are smarter than ours? I don't think so. Most of them went to college here. So the idea that we can't cut taxes is nonsense. The idea that you can't cut government is crazy. They are hiring for Obamacare right now, what is it, 17,000 more IRS agents? Your world's about to get more exciting. Yeah. You can cut government, you can cut the expenditures necessary to go out, you can cut taxes. It just takes some logical sense.
Congressman Garamendi.
I think the question had to do with the tax cuts in the Republican budget that passed 2 weeks ago. A very, very good question. That budget would create a $4 trillion increase in the national debt. It would have an immediate increase in the deficit, and it would be 40 years before there would be a balanced budget. Principal reasons are twofold. One, it is an austerity budget on steroids. 4 million Americans would immediately lose their job in the next 18 months. It would also create one of the most skewed tax codes in the world. For those men and women whose adjusted gross income is over $1 million a year, they would receive a $394,000 tax cut on that $1 million income. They are not the job creators. The job creators are in fact small businesses that would be protected under the proposals that the Democrats have put forward. The Democrats reduced the taxes on businesses 3 times and proposed additional tax cuts on small businesses going forward. Every wage earner in America has received a 4%, 2.5% reduction this year and a 3.5% reduction in the previous year in their taxes. That was the payroll tax deduction. Let's understand that during the Clinton period, the taxes at that time created a budget surplus in the last 2 years of the 1990s. And had those policies been carried forward, and the Bush tax cuts in 2001 and 2003 had not gone forward, the chances are good that we would still have a balanced budget, even with the decline in the economy. But no, instead, major tax cuts took place. Great at the high end, less at the low end, creating, over the last 20 years, the tax policy and other policies have created the greatest disparity between the working men and women of America, that is the middle class, and the top 2%. It is as wide as it has ever been in this nation. The middle class has stalled out, largely because of governmental policies on taxes and on benefits. The Republican budget is an economic disaster. It is the upside down. It is a budget that rewards the rich and takes money from the working men and women of America and destroys jobs. And back to Medicare. It does destroy Medicare, and about 50% of Medicaid, which is cut by over $810 million, goes for nursing home care. So think about your parents and what that might mean.
The final item tonight will be closing remarks, and our order will be Vann, Ray, Garamendi, Tubbs. Thank you. Ms. Vann, your closing remarks.
The middle class in our country is stalled out because we don't have jobs. The middle class in our country is stalled out because they are the small business owners that are being taxed and overregulated to the point that they cannot grow their businesses. We aren't going to make up $16+ trillion from the tax cuts that have been enacted over the last, I'll just say 10 years. We're still not going to cover our national deficit with that. We are stalled out because we are no longer number 1 in manufacturing. We're number 2. And that happened in the last 2 years. We're stalled out because of the government policies that limit us from being able to use our resources and generate jobs. We have very heavy resource job producers, not only in this congressional district, but in this wonderful state. Oil, gas, mining, agriculture, forest. We need to be able to use our resources. We've learned how to use those resources wisely, and those industries create jobs in this district. The middle class is stalled out because of our overzealous and overreaching regulators that refuse to let us grow private sector jobs because it's more beneficial to them when you grow government jobs. We are stalled out because we have leaders who don't have experience in the private sector, who haven't had to sign not only the back of the check, but the front of the check. That's why we're stalled out in this country. And we are at a moment in time that's going to dictate the future of this country. That's going to put us back to being number one in manufacturing, not number two. We are at a point where we have to choose representatives who will put this district first, who care about the 3rd Congressional District, who care about the people in this district, who have a record to prove that they have done things from business development to getting government out of the way for you. Not looking for another seat to run, but truly and honestly here to represent you. And that is the only way we can get this country moving forward. And that's how we get the middle class from stalling out. We don't pull people down. We need to lift people up. You don't break people who are injecting capital in the system to make me as a middle class person do better. You do better because we all come up together. As the tides rise, so do the ships. So we are at a point where you need to choose a representative who can lead not only this 3rd Congressional District to a better future, but this country to a better future. And I hope that you choose me to do that.